Hi, BookTube, and welcome to another fiction review. You know how college and university reading lists for courses, how they often contain alternative or optional books that students may read. And when I was studying, I used to wonder how anyone actually managed to read all the texts that were required for reading, and then how they would get either the time or the inclination for anything extra. Now, today's novel was one of the alternative titles that I was offered during the time I took a course in children's literature. And I don't know, I must have been feeling very, very optimistic the day I downloaded it to my Kindle. Maybe I thought I would get to it fairly soon. 8 years later. The book we're looking at today is Coram Boy by Jamila Gavin, published in 2,328, ebook pages. So I didn't look up on Amazon, and I should have done how many pages that would be in paperback, but it's often a little bit less. So think of perhaps something under 300 pages. And of course, I bought this as a Kindle ebook. And I chose Coram Boy to read right now because you might be wondering, children's fiction, didn't think you read it. I do sometimes. In this case, I chose it to read on the plane while we were flying out to Vancouver. I needed an ebook, obviously. I didn't want to bulk out my luggage with heavy books. And I thought I might prefer a children's book because I'd be reading during the hours when my body would be expecting to sleep. And you don't want something heavy in that situation. And it's also one of the books on my Kindle that happens to be the one that's waited the longest to be read. And I wondered all the time, since the day I bought it, what does the title mean? What exactly is a Coram Boy? But before we find out, let's just learn something about our author. Jamila Gavin was born in 1941 in India, in Mussoorie, which is a city on the lower slopes of the Himalayas. Her English mother met her Indian father while they were both teachers living in Iran, as it happens, and the family moved to England in 1954. Jamila went on to study at Trinity College of Music, which you might think, okay, interesting. She started after university as a BBC studio manager in radio, then as a production assistant and director in music and arts programs on the television. So none of this is sort of saying author of children's books, but she did then go on to write. She said she never imagined that she would become a writer, but she started writing after her own children were born. She wanted to give them stories which reflected a mix of cultures and history, which was part of their pedigree. And her first published book was The Magic Orange Tree, which came out in 1979. And altogether, she's published 30 children's books for all age ranges, 6 to 16. Coram Boy won the Whitbread Best Book of the Year when it came out in 2000. Let's talk about the setting for this book. Part 1 is based in Gloucester and in the surrounding countryside. Particularly, there's a fictitious landed estate called Ashbrook House. Part 2 is set in London, particularly at Coram Hospital, which was established in 1739. I'm going to talk about that more. There is now a museum on the site of the hospital, and you can see it on Google Maps. If I put up a picture now, it's all this lovely green space that you can see. It's not far from Russell Square. It's across the street from Great Ormond Street Hospital for Sick Children. You'll also see a big red dot on this map, which looks a bit irrelevant, but it's irrelevant to the review, but really important for book lovers. That dot is the location of Scoob Books. Scoob is one of London's largest second-hand bookshops. We visited Scoob on Easter Saturday this year, but at that point I had no idea that I was close to Coram Hospital. I had no idea what Coram Hospital was. So the novel in time is divided into two parts, similar to the way it's divided into two different settings in terms of place. The first part of the book is dated around 1741. That's when events are happening. And the second date for the second part of the book is around 1750. In addition, we find out that the composer George Friedrich Handel is living in London. So now we know that we can't go back earlier than 1712 for any events. And the end of the novel features a performance of the oratorio Messiah, the composition of which was finished in 1742. Handel was a patron of Coram Hospital, and he chose to perform his works at the hospital chapel in order to raise money for the institution. The novel ends with an epilogue, and that is considerably later than 1750, perhaps by a couple of decades. Let's talk about Coram Hospital. It was originally called the Foundling Hospital and was established in 1793 in London by Thomas Coram, who was a sea captain. It was the first home built for the bringing up of infants from unmarried mothers or very poor mothers. In Coram's mind, this was a way to reduce the number of abandoned and dying babies that he saw on London streets. It took 17 years of fundraising and also the granting of a royal charter to make the hospital a reality. Of course, news would have traveled who knows how far about this new charity. Nothing quite like it had existed in England before. Jamila Gavin's story is imagining how different people in different circumstances would have regarded Coram Hospital, and it also imagines what life might have been like for children who were brought there. Let's talk about the narrative viewpoint, because I think this book emphasizes boy characters. So I think it's hoping for a reading audience of boys as well as girls. The narrative viewpoint is third person, but Gavin is focusing that viewpoint behind the eyes of a few select characters. They're all of them boys growing up in different circumstances. We've got one who's the heir to a country estate. We've got one who is the son of a respectable tradesperson. And then we've also got one who is poor. He's helping his itinerant father scrape together a living as a peddler. And then there are some Coram boys, residents of this foundling hospital. They're growing up and they're hoping to be able to find work when they come of age and they have to leave the safety of the institution. There's a connection between all these boys, and that connection, it's not apparent right away. You gradually come to realize it as the story moves along. Regarding the number of characters, there are quite a few in this book. I think there are about 15 named characters that you need to remember throughout the story. But I admired how Jamila Gavin structured the story so that you meet these characters in small helpings. So, for example, in the first 2 chapters, you just meet 3 characters and you watch them interact, and also you build your sympathies with them and your antipathies. And the end of those chapters leave you with a little mystery, so you want a bit more. Then, in the third chapter, you get a different 3 characters, and they're introduced, you engage with them, and that segment ends with a small level of suspense because you wonder how one of the characters is going to manage a future event. Then the following chapter takes existing characters from chapter 3, adds a few others, resolves the tension that you wanted to know about from chapter 3, but introduces a slightly higher level of tension with yet another character. And so the suspense is really good. I appreciated the amount of planning that had to be done to ensure that a child reading this book would not be overwhelmed by too many characters appearing all at once. At the same time, they would also not be bored, because the opening chapters, I'd say for the first 6 or 7, you're moving from one character group to another. And that's necessary to sort of set the scene for the story as a whole. But I can imagine that if there weren't also carefully constructed plotting, a child would get really bored doing all this jumping and not yet knowing why they needed to do that. Let's talk about mobility, because England in the 18th century was ascending. It was gaining income and power from the effectiveness of the Royal Navy and seagoing mercantile fleets. They were acquiring, maintaining overseas colonies, conducting global trade. Social mobility was possible, still limited, yes, but less limited. And the right person in the right place at the right time could remake themselves completely. People could also be quickly unmade. A simple thing like an infection, a sudden loss of earnings, the failure of an investment could completely change someone's fate. There were no universal social provisions. So being in the right place at the right time might also be the only chance a person had for survival, right? The novel portrays this precarious state of affairs very well. And representation, well, England in the 18th century publicly trafficked humans. Merchants and ship owners financed expeditions to capture or buy African men and women, and then they used all those effective seagoing vessels to freight those people across the Atlantic like so much cargo and resell them into slavery. Some of this human traffic arrived in English ports. Jamila Gavin, she includes an African boy in the story as a principal character. And by doing this, what she does is opens a window on a lesser known type of exploitation, where black children were purchased by the upper classes because they needed a decorative accessory. The children became the equivalent of life-size dolls or pets. They were dressed up and they had to appear and be shown off to house guests of their master or mistress. And of course, they were also orphans, but often that was because they were forcibly taken from their mothers as very small children. Now, what happened to those children when they grew past the age where they were cute and could be picked up and petted? Well, many were sold again. They were forced onto yet another slave ship and taken to an altogether different kind of captivity. Now, problematic content. Well, a book that centers on the question of what did England do in the 18th century with its unwanted babies? It's going to be unsettling scenes. There are descriptions of infant abuse, neglect, and murder. In recognition, though, of the book's intended audience, to my mind, these scenes, they're not lengthy and they're not graphic. And many of them are described by a viewpoint character, who's usually a boy, who cannot bear to watch, or it's something they noticed in passing when the viewpoint character can't stop to observe for more than a few seconds. Now, in addition, there is also an illegitimate pregnancy where the mother is underage, and this in England was before there was any legal definition of what was underage. And the act of making the baby is described. It lasts a single paragraph. It employs euphemism and just a couple of telling clues. And because this is a children's book, I will read that passage out loud to you in full, just in case there are any parents watching this review who want to understand what exactly appears on the page. They lay in each other's arms all through the rest of the night, not knowing where affection ended and passion began, or which was the child and which the adult. They hardly knew what happened or how, just that feelings and sensations and emotions beyond their understanding overwhelmed them and carried them outside the boundaries of anything they had ever experienced. And even when Alexander finally stumbled to his feet, groping in the darkness for his breeches and boots, they still didn't realize what they had done. She lay motionless. Tenderly, he raised her to her feet. She was silent, dazed. He smoothed down her dress, covered her with her cloak, and quickly led her back along the moonlit path, back to the house all silver beneath a wintry sky. She said nothing when he kissed her mouth and whispered, "Farewell." Then she was swallowed up into the house, and both were obscured from each other. And that's it. Now, for my rabbit hole, I don't really have a rabbit hole topic today. I would only like to talk about the children's literature class I took at the Open University. The principal question that we kept asking and attempting to answer, obviously you never really fully answer it, is should books for children be written primarily as entertainment or primarily as education? And of course, there are related questions, like the one that we could talk about now that we've talked about the problematic content, which is exactly what should children learn about and when? And I can't speak from the experience of raising children or educating children, but I wondered as I was studying that course, was the important question not what children learned or when they learned it, but how they learned it. Let me talk about me. I may have said this little story before, but when I was 6 years old, I discovered my father's hidden stash of Playboy magazines, and because no one knew that I discovered them, I was able to flip through several issues, unsupervised, of course, looking at all the cartoons, reading the captions, trying to read some of the articles, and also sometime between the age of 8 and 12, I discovered where my parents kept their copy of Alex Comfort's famous 1972 book, The Joy of Sex. Now, that was very explicit in its illustrations and in the text. I read that book probably when some parents would think, oh, no, I wouldn't really want my child seeing that at that age. I don't believe I was harmed by learning what I did that way. Learning from books, to me, seems like one of the safest ways. Learning from experience is quite something else. I mean, it can be unexpected and therefore you're not really ready to learn. It can be less comprehensive and informative, and then there can be strong emotions involved, which also, work against actually learning something from the event. So I don't know. I mean, I'm putting that out there. My feeling about Coram Boy was, yes, I would let any child for the ages of 10 plus read it. Absolutely. Less than 10 if they could read it. I didn't feel there was anything in the book that distressed me, but I think that's because the children's lit class kind of exercised me in this question of where should we balance things? And it left me, I think, much more open to possibilities, less closed down in terms of my thinking about what was or was not appropriate and helpful. And that's the review done. What you will find in my description box is a link to the website for the Coram Hospital because it is still running today. I think it does something slightly different than it used to do, but it has a page in there about its history, so you can look it up and learn more about it. What is coming up next? This midweek, I'm hoping to come to you with another children's book review. I know it seems a bit strange, doesn't it? But I really needed a children's book. I needed Coram Boy when I was taking the plane to Vancouver because I thought I would be tired. But I needed this next book, not only flying back, but also for the week after we were back in the UK because, jet lag. I have never experienced such tough jet lag symptoms as I did this trip. And so really, I just couldn't cope with anything more demanding than a children's book. But thankfully, Meg and I, we'd agreed to do this buddy read together, and it's been fantastic. So midweek, look out for my review about that buddy read book. In the meantime, I hope your reading in May is going well. I hope you're not suffering from anything like jet lag or any other kind of fatigue, so that would hold you back in your reading. And I look forward to talking to you again in a few days' time. Take care. Bye-bye.